He only noticed her because she didn't try to be noticed. Her presence was a quiet rebellion in a world screaming for attention, like a song you don't hear until every other noise dies. Eli had just come out of a 3-hour lecture on contemporary philosophy, his head still swimming with paradoxes and dead men's thoughts, and he wandered into the art museum on campus not out of interest, but out of some vague instinct to be anywhere but his own mind. That's where she was, room 7, under the sharp gaze of an unfinished portrait from the 1880s, standing so still she looked like part of the exhibit. She was older than the usual crowd, not dressed for the flirtatious energy of college halls, but for walking through her own life. Dark jeans, worn sweater, ankle boots scuffed in ways that spoke of real ground touched, not just concrete. Her hair was streaked with silver, not from a bottle but from time, and when she turned her head slightly to study the brush strokes of a forgotten artist, Eli noticed the soft lines around her mouth, the subtle fatigue in her eyes that no amount of sleep could fix. And still, she was beautiful, not in the bright, filtered way of girls his age, but like a photograph left out in the sun too long, colors fading but the story becoming clearer. Eli didn't plan to say anything, but something about her made him pause too long beside her, both of them now standing before a painting of a woman holding a letter, her expression unreadable. "Do you think she ever sent it?" he asked, without looking at her. There was a silence, a pause heavy with surprise, and then her voice, low and slightly amused, answered, "No. I think she kept it folded under her pillow for the rest of her life." That was all it took, 5 seconds of shared speculation, and suddenly the museum was no longer a place of silence. She didn't give her name that day. He didn't ask. But over the next week, he returned, always around the same hour, always hoping. And she was there again, once near the Degas sketches, another time pretending to read a brochure beside a marble bust, always with that air of someone trying to feel something she'd forgotten the name of. The 4th time, he brought her coffee without asking what she drank, handing her a plain black cup and saying, "I don't know what you like, but this felt safe." She took it without hesitation, wrapping her hands around the warmth, and this time, she looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since he'd spotted her in room 7, he saw her mouth twitch into something that wasn't polite or tired or passing. It was a smile, real and slightly crooked, like it wasn't used to being on her face anymore. "You're either brave or presumptuous," she said, taking a sip. He watched her reaction closely. "Well," he asked. "Disgusting," she said with mock solemnity. "But necessary." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping side by side, two strangers resisting the itch to make sense of this fragile, unspoken thing forming between them. Her name, he learned days later, was Mara. She didn't volunteer it. He saw it on a flyer at the community center where she was listed as a speaker for an upcoming lecture on art therapy and trauma recovery. It explained a lot. The way she studied every painting like it held a confession, the calm but distant way she spoke, the fact that she never asked him anything too personal. She seemed to live on the edge of the room, of the conversation, of herself. And yet, she kept showing up, even when she didn't have to. Once, he caught her waiting outside the museum just before closing, pacing slowly, pretending to check her phone. "Missed the exhibit?" he asked, and she replied, "I was hoping to see something new today." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and he knew, without needing it said aloud, that she hadn't come for the paintings. They began to walk together. Small routes, a nearby park, the library's rare book section. She'd tell him about the importance of silence in art, how it lets people speak what they can't say out loud. He told her about his failed relationships, his obsession with ideas that didn't matter, his fear of becoming someone who only lived in theory. She listened. She always listened. One afternoon, while walking past a fountain half-choked by leaves, Eli reached down and pulled out a small, broken watch someone had tossed into the water, dried it on his shirt, and handed it to her. "Still worth something," he said. She took it without a word, holding it like it might start ticking if she just believed hard enough. Then, for the second time, she smiled, not the fleeting kind from the museum, but something deeper, sadder, more alive. "No one's given me anything in a long time," she whispered, her voice catching slightly, and he realized then that her smile wasn't just rare. It was painful, pulled from somewhere that hadn't been touched in years. That was the moment it began. Not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with a broken watch and a smile that shook something loose in both of them. They started seeing each other outside the museum, in spaces that weren't designed for accident. A bookstore tucked behind a coffee shop where the lights were too dim for selfies and the walls smelled like paper and glue. An abandoned churchyard where the stone benches were cracked and moss grew where names used to be legible. A quiet diner far enough from town that no one from either of their circles would wander in without a reason. They didn't speak of what they were doing, never named it, never gave it structure. It was just Mara and Eli, a woman who didn't ask for anything and a man who needed her to. He never told his friends. She never told anyone at all. She said it was better that way. He didn't disagree, though sometimes it itched at him not to. He learned things slowly, like how she never turned her phone on until late in the morning, how she answered messages like they were obligations, how she spoke about her past without pronouns or details. There was always someone else in the story, an ex-husband who moved to Boston with someone younger, a son she didn't talk to much, a life that had been set up neatly once but folded in on itself with time. I used to teach full-time, she said once, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Now I do consultations and talk to people who've convinced themselves they're broken. He asked her if she believed anyone actually was. No, she said. But people cling to their pain like it's their last proof of being real. Eli never spoke about his parents, who lived in a gated suburb 3 hours north and called twice a week to remind him that it wasn't too late to change majors. He didn't tell her about the girl he dated last year who had broken up with him in the middle of a movie theater, whispering that he was too distant, too abstract, too somewhere else all the time. He didn't tell her that he kept her contacts saved under a fake name, or that he reread their messages like he was studying for an exam that would never come. Mara never asked for more than he gave, and he gave her just enough to stay. He liked that she didn't need him to be anything other than present. But people watch, even when they pretend not to. It started with a glance from across the quad. A classmate named Patrick leaned in too close during a group discussion and said, "You've been looking happier. Got a secret you're not sharing?" Eli laughed it off, said nothing, moved on. But then another friend mentioned seeing him with someone near the bookstore, said the woman looked mature. He shrugged it off. "A professor," he said. "Art department. Just helping me with research." The lie wasn't hard. What was harder was how easy it felt to say it. Mara warned him once, half a joke, half a threat. "Your age doesn't scare me," she said. "What scares me is how quickly people want a story when they think it's none of their business." He didn't know whether to kiss her or apologize, so he did both. They stayed like that longer than usual, sitting in the back seat of his car, heat turned off, the windows fogged. She held his hand tightly, like she was trying to remember the shape of it. "You make me forget how tired I am," she said once, her voice flat, but her grip betraying the rest. "But I always remember again." It was 2 weeks later when the first real crack appeared. He was walking across campus after a seminar when his phone buzzed, a number he didn't know. The message was short. "You should be more careful. Someone always notices." Attached was a blurry photo, him and Mara, walking out of the diner. Her hand on his shoulder. Nothing explicit, nothing illegal. Just visible. His chest tightened as he stared at it. No name. No threat. Just the knowledge that the thing they had so carefully avoided naming was now known by someone who wanted him to feel the weight of that knowledge. He didn't tell her right away. He wanted to protect her from it, but also himself, because saying it aloud would make it real. For 2 days he carried it, jumping at every glance, wondering who had sent it, what they wanted. He changed her name in his contacts again. He deleted photos, but he couldn't erase the feeling of being watched. On the 3rd day, he showed her. They sat on a bench in the library courtyard, the air too warm for October. He handed her the phone without a word. She stared at the image, unmoving. "I've seen worse," she said eventually, but her voice was sharper now, like it had passed through something hard. "They didn't say who they were?" He shook his head. "No threats, just this." She handed the phone back and stood slowly. "Then we make a decision," she said. "We either stop now, quietly, or we stop pretending it doesn't matter." He asked her what she wanted. She didn't answer right away. "I want to keep feeling like I'm not invisible," she said, "but not at the cost of destroying what little stability I have left." Her eyes met his. "That includes you." That night, he lay awake wondering what it would cost him to keep this secret. His reputation? His degree? His sense of control? He didn't know. But more than that, He wondered what it had already cost her to let him in. The shift came quietly, without drama, without either of them saying what was obvious. There were no long talks about what they meant to each other, no labels, no declarations. But they started meeting at night more often, not out of necessity, but because it was easier to speak after the world slowed down. Mara would drive to the edge of the city, where the traffic thinned and the streetlights were spaced far enough apart that their glow didn't touch every corner. Eli would bring tea in a thermos and sometimes a notebook, not because he needed to write, but because it gave his hands something to do. They sat in her car, in his car, on the hood of whichever one they had driven, and talked without watching the clock. The only interruptions came from distant trains or the occasional dog barking behind a fence. He told her things he hadn't even told himself, like how he didn't believe he would become anything his parents would be proud of, how most of the time he didn't even want to try. She told him about her father's silence, her mother's constant corrections, how she had learned to hold back everything that might be used against her later. They didn't try to fix each other. They didn't pretend they could. One night he asked her what she missed most, and after a long pause she said, "I used to dance. Nothing formal. Just in the living room, with music too loud and no one watching. I stopped when it started feeling stupid." He didn't say anything at first, just reached into his backpack and pulled out a small speaker, scrolled through his phone, and played a song she might have known 10 years ago. She laughed at first, tried to protest, but he stood up and held out his hand. "No one's watching," he said. "And it's not stupid." She looked at him like he had given her something she didn't ask for, but couldn't return. She took his hand, reluctantly, and they moved without rhythm, just two bodies in the dark swaying to something only they could hear. Her head rested against his chest for a while. She didn't speak until the music stopped. "I forgot what this felt like," she said. "Not the dancing. Just this." After that, everything felt more exposed, not because anything had changed between them, but because the closeness made it harder to pretend it didn't matter. He found himself checking his phone constantly, not for threats, but for her. She texted in full sentences, used punctuation, never sent emojis. When she sent voice notes, her tone was always measured, like she was talking to a patient, but he could tell when she was tired or smiling or somewhere in between. He started noticing how different she sounded when she spoke to him compared to others. There was a softness in her voice that she didn't use during her lectures or when she answered calls in the middle of their walks. She was colder with everyone else, sharper, like she had decided the world didn't deserve her warmth unless it earned it. With him, she didn't put up shields. She didn't need to. But the fear didn't disappear. If anything, it sank deeper into their routines. They chose restaurants carefully, avoided areas where Eli's classmates might be. They never touched each other in public. In photos, they stood apart like strangers. She refused to be added to any group chat, never followed him on social media. "I won't be a name someone scrolls past and wonders about," she said once, and he understood even if it stung. When they stayed in, she would cook something basic and he would bring dessert from a bakery that stayed open late. They would talk until they ran out of words and then just sit quietly, her hand resting on his knee, his fingers tracing the seam of her jeans. These were the nights that made them feel real. It was after one of those nights that it happened. They had parked behind the library, a spot no one used after dark. The air was thick with humidity, and the windows fogged again, like they always did. They had kissed, nothing hurried, just mouths pressed together like they needed confirmation that the other was still there. Eli had pulled back first, laughing about something she said earlier, and she had wiped lipstick from his cheek with the sleeve of her cardigan. That's when they saw it, movement. Just beyond the trees, where the lights didn't reach. A figure, not walking, standing, watching, too far to see clearly, too close to ignore. Eli's heart kicked against his ribs. Mara froze. He reached for the keys and started the car, and the figure turned slowly, then walked away without a word. They didn't chase. They didn't speak. For the next hour, they sat in silence in a different parking lot, not looking at each other. Finally, she said, "It started." He nodded, unsure what she meant. "We were careless," she added. "That's all it takes. One pair of eyes." He asked her if she wanted to stop. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. "I don't want to live like I owe everyone an explanation." Then she looked at him, for the first time that night, and said, "But I know what this town does with things it doesn't understand." He told her he didn't care. She said he would. Eventually. By the next morning, they both knew the clock had started ticking. The calm was over. Something was coming. They just didn't know how soon. It came apart faster than they expected, not with scandal headlines or public outcry, but with the kind of personal betrayal that strips away whatever illusions they'd built around safety. It started when Eli's roommate, Julian, someone who rarely looked up from his laptop unless it involved fantasy sports or finding a party, mentioned something in passing over cereal, his voice casual, eyes too focused on the spoon. "You know Mara Ellison, right? I heard she's been spending time with a student. Guy's got a thing for older women, apparently. Word is, it's serious." The blood left Eli's face before he could fake anything. Julian didn't look up, didn't seem to suspect anything, but the words stuck, heavy and precise. He asked where Julian heard that, and Julian just shrugged, said it came up at a department mixer, some adjunct dropping names like they knew something. "Could be made up," he added. "But people love this stuff, especially when someone's breaking the rules." Eli didn't reply. He went to class and couldn't concentrate. He reread Mara's last message 10 times. "Meet me at the gallery. 7. No change of plans." She didn't know yet. She couldn't. That night, when he told her what Julian said, she stood still for a long time, her jaw tight, one hand pressed to her temple, like she could push the noise out of her head. "It's not surprising," she said. "What's surprising is how long it took." He asked what they should do. She didn't answer, just started pacing near the exit. "They'll come for me first," she said. "They'll turn me into the story. I'm the older woman. The irresponsible one. You'll be the confused kid who got caught up in something. That's how this always goes." They stayed at her place that night, both of them too tired to talk about what it meant. He made her tea. She didn't drink it. She sat at the edge of the bed for an hour, staring at nothing. Then she said, "There's a conference next week. I'm speaking. You can't come." He nodded, already knowing that she was pulling away. "They'll be watching," she added. "If you show up, they'll talk. If they talk, I lose work. I lose clients. I lose everything I've built since my divorce." He said he didn't care. She didn't argue. She just said, "That's the difference. You can afford not to." The next few days moved in fragments. Rumors thickened. Someone claimed they had seen her kiss someone in a car. Someone else said they overheard her on the phone talking softly, using a name she never used in class. None of it could be proved, but none of it needed to be. It was enough for people to believe it. One of Eli's professors pulled him aside after class, voice quiet and careful. "Whatever's going on, be smart. There are things that follow you beyond graduation." Eli said he didn't know what he meant. The professor just looked at him like he knew exactly how stupid that answer was. Mara stopped answering during the day. When she did reply, her messages were shorter, colder, like she was already preparing for separation. He knew the signs, but he ignored them. She still called at night, even if only for a few minutes. Her voice was always tired. He kept telling her he was with her, that he didn't care, that he would stand by her. "You think this is a movie," she said one night. "But real people don't get endings. They get consequences." Then came the conference. She had been preparing for it for weeks. A gathering of therapists, artists, educators. A big deal for someone rebuilding a reputation after a messy divorce and a job loss 5 years back. He wasn't invited, but he went. Not to be seen, just to be there. He stood in the back of the ballroom, behind a curtain, just out of sight. Her name was called. She stepped onto the stage with the same calm he had fallen for. She spoke about art, about emotional safety, about the balance between personal growth and social acceptance. Her words were measured, professional, nothing personal. But the question came from the audience, the kind no one wants to hear. A woman in a gray suit, face unfamiliar, stood and asked, "Do you believe personal relationships should be kept separate from professional environments, especially when one party holds more power than the other?" The air went stiff. Mara froze for a half second. Then she stepped away from the podium. "I believe transparency matters," she said. "But so does privacy. People are more than their mistakes. They're more than rumors. But sometimes, no matter what you do, others will decide your story for you." The room stayed quiet. Then a voice from the other side, younger, male. "Are you in a relationship with a student?" Mara blinked. The moderator tried to move things forward, but it was too late. The question echoed. The audience leaned forward. She looked out, not at the crowd, but beyond it, to the edge of the room where Eli stood. Her eyes landed on him. She didn't flinch. I have nothing to hide, she said. But I'm not answering questions that come from spite disguised as concern. The moderator thanked her. The audience clapped, some out of support, some out of discomfort. Eli left before she came off stage. She didn't call that night. The next morning, she texted only once. We can't keep pretending. It's not just about us anymore. He stared at the words until his screen went black. He waited 3 days before answering her message. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to be sure she meant it. The silence between them felt different now, no longer protective or deliberate, but cold and full of expectation. When he finally typed something, it wasn't long or dramatic. He wrote, "Then let's stop pretending. Let's just be real, whatever that looks like." She didn't respond for hours. When she did, it was late and simple. "Come over. Just talk. Nothing else." When he arrived, her lights were off except for one lamp in the kitchen. She stood at the sink, washing a single glass like it needed her attention more than the situation between them. She didn't turn around until he sat down. Her face was tired, eyes dull, not from lack of sleep, but from too much awareness. She poured water into the glass and set it in front of him, then leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "I should have stopped this earlier," she said, "before it got complicated, before people started shaping it into something it wasn't." He didn't touch the water. He washed her hands. "You didn't use me," he said. "This wasn't power. It wasn't manipulation. It was two people making a choice." She let out a breath, not quite a sigh. "That's how we saw it. But that's not how it plays out for people like me. I've got history. You've got potential. They won't see this as equal no matter how we lived it." He told her he didn't care what they saw. She shook her head slowly. "You don't yet. But you will. When you're applying for jobs and someone recognizes my name. When you're explaining gaps in your resume and someone brings this up. When you meet someone your age and wonder if they'd ask you about me." He stood up then, angry, not at her, but at the idea that what they had could be turned into something he should be ashamed of. "So we just erase it," he said. "Pretend none of it mattered because it's easier for them to sleep at night?" She looked at him hard. "I'm saying it's not just ours anymore. Once it's out there, it belongs to everyone who thinks they have a right to judge it." The argument didn't last long. They weren't the kind of people who raised their voices. But they left things unclear, half-finished. He stayed the night, not because it made sense, but because he didn't want the last memory of her to be a conversation that didn't end properly. They lay on the couch, fully dressed, her head on his shoulder, his fingers moving through her hair in slow patterns. Neither of them spoke. When he woke up, she was in the kitchen again, but this time dressed for the day, bag packed, keys in hand. "I have a client across town," she said. "I don't know when I'll be back." He nodded, not because he accepted it, but because he understood the message. The next week moved without structure. The rumors had settled into background noise, no longer shocking, just part of the social ecosystem that thrived on quiet scandal. His professors looked at him differently, more cautious, less open. His classmates whispered less, but stared more. One of them, a girl from his literature seminar, asked him if it was true. "I don't care," she said quickly. "I'm just curious how it even started." He gave her no answer. He stopped showing up to the museum. He stopped walking by the gallery where they used to meet. He deleted her number, but didn't block it. 2 weeks later, they saw each other again. Not planned, not timed. He was leaving a friend's place near the university when he saw her walking alone, coat drawn tight, face unreadable. She saw him the same moment he saw her. They both stopped. She looked thinner. He looked more exhausted. She walked over. No greeting. No apology. Just, "Are you okay?" He nodded. "You?" She didn't lie. Not really. They stood there for a while, neither willing to step away. Then she said, "I gave a talk at the Women's Center. Someone asked if emotional vulnerability made it harder to keep boundaries. I told them yes." He didn't ask if she meant him. She didn't offer it. "I don't hate you," she said after a pause. "I just don't know how to hold what we had without it cutting into the rest of my life." He said, "I don't hate you either, but I'm not okay with pretending like we didn't try." She smiled, barely. "We did more than try. We made it work longer than it had any right to." He asked if she would ever want to try again. She looked at him without blinking. "Maybe, but not now. I need to rebuild what this threatened. And you need space to see if it was love or just timing." They didn't hug. They didn't touch. They parted like people who'd said everything and still had more left, but not enough courage to say it now. That night, He wrote her a message he didn't send. It said, "I still think of your laugh before I sleep. I still hear it in my head when things get quiet. I don't know what that means, but I hope one day I'll find out." He saved it, unread, and closed his phone. The last thing they said to each other was at a distance. A week later, she spoke at a panel discussion about ethics and mentorship. He sat in the back again, not hiding, just watching. During the Q&A, someone brought up personal relationships again. Mara paused, then said, "Everyone wants a clean answer. A label. A verdict. But life isn't court. Sometimes we connect with people at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and it doesn't make it evil. It just makes it difficult. You live through it, and then you decide who you'll be after." She looked into the crowd briefly. Maybe at him. Maybe not. Then she turned back to the moderator and asked, "Next question?"